Big Daddy dream.
Yes. Lord, can you get a lead in 3 o'clock there?
Okay, while you're doing that, if y'all would, let's do 3 o'clock prayer and then we'll get started. All right? All right, let's do it. Father, we just come to you on this 3 o'clock hour. We lift you up and praise you. Thank you, Father, for your Shabbats, your feasts and festivals. Father, we just honor you and praise you for this Torah portion, whatever that, just anoint Elisa and whatever she's going to bring to us this hour. And Father, and we just ask that you just, as always, you would just plant these seeds in our heart, that they would grow and become good fruit for us to be able to take to others. So Father, we honor you and praise you this day. We're just so excited for the angels that watch over us and everything that you provided for us this day. Amen, amen, amen.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
I think it's on. Is it green?
It's yellow.
Is it so green?
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Oh, wow. Okay, the trouble with this is I don't think I can read it. I'm going to have to come forward a little bit.
Lord, come around.
Do what?
You want to come forward?
Yeah, I got to be able to.
Okay.
Because it's not showing on here.
Walk up until you can see the screen. I'm going to take you to the edge.
Take me to the edge.
You are on the edge right there.
Okay.
Just don't sneeze.
Okay, hopefully I can read. If not, I'll have to get my glasses. So Shabbat Shalom, good to be back in town for a few days to do some recording.
Now you should be able to click here. Well, no, it won't bring it up.
That might
Real
work.
small, okay. Same thing.
Okay.
Not left.
You know I'm old and I don't see small things well.
Sorry. That's a rotate.
Welcome to our YouTube live stream if you're out there somewhere. We're not at home today, obviously, but we're doing the best we can. We'll see. Maybe I can read it from here. I might have to have a volunteer, right?
Yes.
The Lord loves a volunteer, but not from Tennessee. I'm kidding. Okay, so what I thought I would share today is maybe a little bit of a review from Bamidbar from last week, because it gave us the foundation of the encampments of the 4 tribes and how those were organized in the wilderness. And if you'll notice, they were numbered for war. We had a word come forth this morning about Adonai Tsebaot. And so the particular organization, this particular census had to do with how the tribes of Israel were arranged and organized in case there was an enemy attack. I know we tend to see the nice pictures of the tribes of Israel facing toward the Mishkan. We think of their total focus was on the Mishkan. But if their eyes were to the center of the camp, then who's watching out for Amalek? Who's watching out for the Midianites? Who's watching out for all the ites that were running around the Bamidbar at that time? So in Bamidbar last week, we looked at the organization of those 12 tribes into 4 specific divisions. So in addition to their 12 tribal banners, on each side, there would have been 3 tribes encamped as a division, and each one of those would have had another banner, and they are going to face in the direction of a specific wind. And so I'd like to review a little bit of what we did last week and then bring it into this week, Torah portion Naso. And there's something a little bit different here. There's a census of the Levites. It says, lift up the head of the Levites. And if we keep reading, again, we're deep into tribal territory, by the way. When we're in Bamidbar and when we're in Naso, you are deep in tribal territory. If you want to understand the nature of the 12 tribes and then understand the nature of the divine chariot in Ezekiel that is represented by these 4 divisions of tribal encampments, look at these 2 Torah portions plus the Torah portion matot, which literally means tribes. He's given you a dictionary. And so if you're reading in the book of Revelation and you're a little concerned about those 4 angels who are holding back the 4 winds, you keep reading and you realize that there's a military census that follows that. He starts numbering and sealing the 144,000 from the tribes. So did the prophecy begin in Revelation or did the prophecy begin in the Torah?
Yes.
It starts in the Torah. And so anything you want to understand in the book of Revelation, go back to the Torah. Know what's in those Torah portions, and it'll be just like having a general guideline says, if I learn this, then it will clarify this over here. And that's what I'm concerned about, is bringing into this Torah portion not just the fact that the Levites are going to be counted for their service, their encampments are established, what I'm really concerned about is hopefully helping you see the wheel within the wheel of the divine chariot, because ultimately you have this outer rim of the 12 tribes encamping around the clans of the Levites and the Kohanim. So as the service of the priests and the Levites revolves all that around the Mishkan, we see the tribes of Israel acting as kind of the go-betweens between the Levitical service and the world out there. And so this is the easiest way when people say, well, we're a kingdom of priests. Does that mean we've replaced the literal priests and Levites? No, it does not. It means you don't know your role. If you ask that sort of question, but it's a good question because you need to know your role. If you are not a literal by lineage priest or Levite, then you can't replace them in exactly that capacity. But the good news is that if you're just the average, everyday tribal person, you're still a priest. Because these encampments now become priests to the nations. Does that make sense? So as the priests are priests to Israel, Israel is the priest to the nations. So it's still a kingdom of priests. No matter which category of priesthood you fall into, you're still a priest. So you still have a very high calling. What we don't want to do is be like Korah, who's coming up soon, who's already a Levite, but he covets the priesthood and all the goodies that go with it. And so we don't want to look at the priests or the Levites and say they get all the goodies, because we probably misunderstand all the obligations that go along with the goodies. We tend to want the goodies, but not the obligations. So if you're in a camp, be glad and rejoice, because you're put in exactly the right place for your gifts, for your talents, and so forth. And he wants to organize us there. Why I wanted to kind of mash these together, though, is that you see the 12 princes of the 12 tribes in Naso, who now come alive, and they're bringing these extravagant gifts in for the service of the Mishkan. Now, I don't know about you guys, but most people, when they give extravagant gifts, all this silver and gold and sacrifices and covered wagons, go west, young man, right? We tend to be much freer in giving when we feel that we have an abundance, right? When I feel like I've got enough in my bank account, I can give more charity without worrying that, oops, I may not be able to pay the groceries next week. When you're worried about paying the groceries, it's really hard to give lavish gifts. It doesn't mean you won't give. In fact, poorer people by ratio tend to give more to charity. But in terms of lavishing people, just heaping helpings of gifts, it's because we feel, number one, very secure in our future, We feel like that 401k is doing very nicely for retirement, thank you. And so I can afford to give this away. Or we have so much, we're not even gonna notice it. I won't even notice that. And so they're out here in the middle of the wilderness. There's no unemployment office. There's no industry, there's no factories. It's pretty much a self-sustaining encampment. It's a self-sustaining nation. And nevertheless, even without a source of income, each of these 12 tribes is lavishing gifts upon the Mishkan. And you'll notice that, I want to say there's 72 added verses to the Torah, because instead of just saying, all the 12 tribes sent this, 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 and this, instead, it'll detail every single tribe. And when you use that much real estate, it's for a reason. Because how many of you know there's not one idle word in the Torah? Everything has a place in the Torah. Not even the prepositions are random. Even the prepositions focus your attention. And in fact, there's so much wordplay in Hebrew, we're missing a lot of it. It'll build 2 or 3 wonderful concepts off of one wordplay. And so it means literally what it says, and then it's building skyscrapers of understanding if you're willing to climb the steps, right? You've got to put forth a little bit of effort and check that BPM as you get higher and higher. But see, every tribe was so precious that he took up that precious real estate of a Torah scroll so that nobody would be missed. And that's giving you a message. You're important. Every single person is so important that he took up, I believe, 72 extra verses in the Torah to say how important every single person was, regardless of where they were camping, regardless of what their gift or their blessing was or was not. And that's the beautiful thing, the way they were arranged. They were arranged so that if one particular tribe had a strength, they were placed in the same division as another tribe that maybe was not so gifted in that area, and vice versa. So that that division was truly a cohesive division and capable of facing any enemies, you say it 3 times, any enemy that might come from that side. Every side was equally equipped to handle an enemy that might uniquely come from that side. And once you understand the 4 winds, you'll have a better eye for what sort of enemy might come from which different direction, if that makes sense. So these 2 Torah portions on the traditional calendar are always timed to where Bamidbar is going to fall just before Shavuot, and Naso is going to fall just after Shavuot. So these are bookends, and when you see those, you understand that it's forcing me to look at Shavuot in a particular way, because in Bamidbar, it says, in the wilderness of Sinai. So your focus right here, you're shifting away from the priestly manual, and you're saying there's some things I need to learn about who I am as a tribes person. I'm not that woke, but we're tribes people. If you want to understand your relationship to the wilderness, these are the pages to look to. In the wilderness, but not just the wilderness, specifically the wilderness of Sinai, the giving of the Torah. And then we have Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, and then in Naso, he slides that other bookend into place. He says, each of these tribes' encampments is precious. And as they were encamping here around the Levites and around the priests, we understand that they were brought into the wilderness to be humbled. That was the whole point of taking there. Now what the text says more than once, I took you into the wilderness to humble you, to see what was in your heart. And that's why I love taking people down to the seeing wilderness, down in the south of Israel. You talk about a desert country. There's nothing out there. I think the population's around 7,000 for the whole Tamar Regional Council down there. Not a lot of people, but you can almost see on their faces when they roll up on the bus and they're like, Are we getting drinks here or what? Are we getting snacks? Like, no, this is where you're staying. And all of a sudden, you get how he brought them into the wilderness to humble them to see what was in their heart. Because you're still thinking, but that 4-star hotel back in Caesarea was pretty nice. And, okay, I feel like there's a really soft spot in my caravan, like I could fall through the floor, and people actually have. I don't think they were guests, but it does. It humbles you. It takes you out there. It gets you away from the noise. Whatever it is that you were in bondage to, it takes you away from it. And then you'll find out if you're still in bondage to it, even when he takes you out of Egypt, if there's still some Egypt in you. So this is a particular orientation of these two Torah portions. And let me see if I can, here we go. These are the encampments, just for reinforcement from last week, so that you could see these northern tribes. You've got Naphtali, you've got Asher and Dan facing north. They are facing toward the north wind. They have been scattered, by the way, and when the lion roars, they will come from the north. The southern tribes, you've got Gad, Shimon, and Reuven. Those are camped on the south. And by the way, up in the north with Dan, his standard, it's called a degel, flag, banner, it's a degel. And his degel was an eagle, eagle degel. It's fun, say it, eagle degel. Eagle degel. There's an eagle degel up there. Eagle degel on a bagel, right? So the eagle, remember he says, remember how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself, where in the Sinai wilderness. He brought you into the wilderness to give you the Torah on the north wind. The north wind has a special connection to where King Messiah has gone dormant, according to rabbinic literature. They say King Messiah is hidden in the north, and he has gone dormant. And when he arouses from his dormancy, he will come from the north. And so when he says, I bore you on eagle's wings, which wind got up under the Israelites in order to carry them to Mount Sinai? The wind of Messiah. The wind of Messiah. And I'll show you a really interesting quotation about that. That makes it so much clearer why the disciples were in such amazement when he told the winds and the sea to be still on the Galilee. So down here in the south, on this division, you've got the Degel, again, pointing south, which is going to be the image or the symbol of a man. And this should be sounding familiar because this is a reflection of the divine chariot. Described in Ezekiel, you're going to have the lion, the bull, the eagle, and then the man. And remember, the divine chariot could move in any direction, no matter what. It didn't have to turn. And that's exactly the purpose of this encampment. It can face any enemy without turning. Because remember, each side is equally prepared. It can also minister in that direction. For instance, the tribe that's headed by Dan's division should be able to minister to the nations in the north. Same thing in the south. You've got Reuven there with that symbol of the human being. And ultimately, it makes sense why there would be a symbol of a human being, because the spirit of Adonai is in human beings. It's important. So with the south, there's a south wind. The north wind, by the way, is said, and this is all from the perspective of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the measuring line, no other nation. Other nations, your winds blow differently. But from the perspective of the measuring line of Jerusalem, as Zechariah prophesied, What's going to come from the north is going to be hail, snow, and damaging rain. What will come from the south, from the direction of the man, will be dew and showers, which, by the way, both of those are associated with resurrection. And so when Messiah, King Messiah comes, he will say to the north, give them up. And he'll say to the south, don't hold back. Well, this is counter to everything we know about the wind. If we were sailors, we would understand the concept of a prevailing wind. If one wind is prevailing, then it's stronger than the others. And so anybody who could harmonize what the north wind is doing and what the south wind is doing is a pretty special person. Because that's not normally, they don't normally function simultaneously to produce a favorable result. In fact, when they work simultaneously, you're liable to see chaos. It might be spinning tornadoes, cyclones, hurricanes. You ever notice how with the hurricane map thingies, whatever you call them, how it'll show this? And it'll, you know, smart people who understand meteorology, I didn't think I could do it, but I tried. A for effort, right? Meteorological, they can show you how all these winds are working to produce this unique disaster. But originally, were these winds created to act like that? No. And how Israel encamps determines how the winds blow, by the way. Do you know that? It's a big machine. It's a divine machine that was set up. So over here on the west, you have Ephraim heading up that division, and he will face in the direction of the west wind. What comes from the west is darkness. And then over here on the east, facing east, which Kedem, it means the origin, the beginning. Facing the beginning is the tribe of Judah, and he's going to have a lion degel. Ephraim had the bull or the ox degel. And so when this encampment, when it was time for it to move, we know that the cloud would start moving. There were 7 clouds all total. You can see the clouds of glory that formed like a city wall. There were also clouds under their feet, and there were clouds over their head. Paul talks about this to the Corinthians. But there's a pillar of cloud that when it moves, the camp knows it's time to start breaking camp and moving. So when the Levites see that, they'll pack up the Mishkan, and then when the ark starts moving, which tribe moves first? Judah. You might say, well, what if they're going the other way? I don't know. I just know they moved first. I can't tell you that. But from the west, we say, well, the east is light. It is, and that's a good thing. But also come from the east, it comes the most damaging winds. It's a hot, withering plague of a wind. It was associated with the locusts in Egypt. So you can see on each side here, there's potential for good things, but there's also potential for chaos. That's what we want to avoid, is the chaos. Because here's the principle in a nutshell. This big machine that's camped here in the wilderness, they were facing the 4 winds because what happened inside those clouds of glory in the wilderness affected the entire world. All the way out to the end of the 4 winds. What happened inside those clouds of glory affected everything else on earth. What Israel does affects everything else on earth. So if they're obedient inside of here, then these 4 winds can blow favorably and harmoniously. Whatever they're doing it in unity. The dew is coming in the right season, not the wrong season. How many of you want dew in the early spring when you need the rain? It's not good enough. Wintertime, You need the snows because you need, again, that moisture. But what if it's still snowing in June? Not a good thing. So what is happening here with the four winds, it's going to not just bring you your weather, it's going to bring you your temperature. It's going to bring you what we call natural disasters, but they're not really natural, because if we went back to the garden, it would be completely unnatural for the four winds to be bringing harm to human beings. They were completely under control and in perfect unity at that time. And this encampment was meant to be like a little Garden of Eden. In fact, the building of the Mishkan matches the creation. And so what are they doing inside of here? They are doing gardening techniques 101. They are relearning how to live in a garden. How well did they do? Probably as good as my garden, right? We had late frost this year. It was hard to get anything in, but the beautiful thing is, if we go with this idea that what Israel does affects the weather, then I think that the Father knew that our plants needed to go in later than normal this year. And we don't know why. We don't know why the wind blows the way that it does. We just know that our obedience does affect it. Our disobedience also affects it. So if they're disobedient in this little place, what's going to happen around the world? Chaos. If they're obedient, see, I would love to have, you know how archaeologists and biologists, they're pulling these samples of things and they can find the certain year that something was. If you could find the year that they built the Mishkan and they weren't arguing, they were all giving generously, donating work, doing everything. This was like a beautiful window of time for them. If you could pull core samples from that little place of time in the wilderness, I think you would find there were favorable winds and weather all over the earth. And a lot of it has to do with what was going on in the sacrificial system, because remember, those four horns were meant to aim toward the four directions of the earth. What was going on that sacrificial altar with Israel affected the four corners of the earth. And that's why our personal sacrifices, we put it on that sacrificial altar, and it will affect what's happening in the world. We tend to think, oh, well, I keep the commandments, but, it's just, it's got to a certain point, I don't even think about stuff. I just do what the commandments tell me. It's not special. It's just a mini mitzvah at this point. There's no mini mitzvah. They're all major mitzvahs. Major mitzvot. So if you go to the grocery store and you're sorting into your basket and you're not even thinking about, oh, look at me, I picked something kosher. If it's just part of who you are now, don't worry, it's great. It's still not a mini mitzvah. What you just did, just said, nope, I don't know where that came from, but that's not kosher. One little thing like that is affecting the weather. You realize that? One little mitzvah. Collectively, Israel does not have the same power that it did in the wilderness or in Jerusalem. This concentrated power is real power. But nevertheless, you still have the same power in you that they had in the wilderness. You still have that southern wind in you that resurrected Yeshua from the dead. And so wherever you are, south, you're in a great place. You got to do a resurrection down here, right? You feel like you're resurrecting? There's no many mitzvahs. You keep obeying his word, and even though you were scattered to the four winds, you were still a major power. And he is preparing you to bring you to this place. This is the great cloud of witnesses, by the way. What are they witnessing to? The testimony. Where is the testimony? It's in the ark. It's in the tent of meeting, and it's in the tent of the testimony. You are testifying to the commandments of the Most High. That is the great cloud of witnesses. And he is beginning to call you back. How will you know it's time? Who moves first? Judah. And what sound does the lion make? He roars. Well, I don't know that he's roaring right now. Well, yeah, he has been, kind of. If you've ever heard those Israeli jets fly overhead down in the south, there's some roaring going on where they hit those afterburners. Pretty awesome. But see, that's a natural army. Last week's Torah portion, Bamidbar, he was taking a census of a military army. The same one, says to the 4 angels, hold back those 4 winds until I have sealed the bondservants. Right? Now, don't think if you're not one of those 144,000 that you're not sealed. Those are only first fruits. That's only a portion of the great fields that they represent. So don't worry about being one of those. As long as you got a representative, right? It's important because what we are doing right now is preventing the winds from completely destroying the earth, which by all rights they should. Because what's going on in Israel? Chaos. They can't even get a government together right now. What's going on in Israel outside of Israel? Chaos. They can't get together on any wind of doctrine, right? So there's chaos and there's chaos, but there's still a remnant. And they say, you know what, I don't know the answers to everything, but until I find out the answers, I'm going to keep, there's no mini mitzvah. I'm just going to keep doing what I know to do. And eventually, he's going to notice that. And I'm going to hear a lion roar because I'm prepared for it. I'm working on my gardening techniques right now. I want to be able to hear that lion roar, so when it's time, I will know where that great cloud of witnesses is. I will know who my people are. Now, he might have to organize us. And remember, in the census, that was part of it. They had to come say, well, who's my mother, who's my father, and so forth. And then you say, well, I don't know. Well, guess what? Jews don't either. Jews will tell you, we don't know what tribe we're from. There's some who might have an idea. I'm from Levi, I'm a Cohen. They tend to hold those records pretty dear. But for the rest of them, they don't know what tribe they're from. They're going to have to be sorted and organized as well. And if you don't have a lineage, what does he say? Give them an assignment in whatever territory they're in. And that's good news. You don't have to have your pedigree when you go. Jews don't either. We're in the same boat. Right? Okay, so point. This is just more information, again, coming from the Jewish sources, but I'm going to summarize it for you because you've had lots to eat, and me too. We might be feeling a nap coming on. But the way that Rashi, and he's such a great commentator because he dissects the Hebrew text. He says, why is this like this? Why is this like this? Why shouldn't this be like this? And so he starts working through the problems. And so as he's working through this problem, the arrangement of the camps, one thing that he notes is that each division travels on a side that they're assigned to. And the division that they travel with, which is distinguished again by that degel, not the tribal one, but the divisional degel. Lion, bull, man, eagle. He's saying that they are facing toward that, you can see in Hebrew, leruach. They're facing toward not just the wind, but the spirit. What they're doing in their encampments is they are following the spirit. And we're not just talking about the pillar of cloud that moved according to the spirit. Each side had a specific spirit associated with it. And I can show you that on this menorah if you'll remind me later, because when I was sitting there and Mark was asking about something, I don't know what the word was. I'm not even listening. I'm looking at this menorah. I'm like, I see Yeshua. I see how he works right there. I see how these winds turn. It dawned on me. But each tribe in its division moves according to a certain spirit. There's certain things associated with these winds that can bring blessing to the earth. If there's obedience, then the division of Reuben can bring the dew and the showers upon the earth. If there is obedience, then the tribe of Judah can bring light. And his division, they bring light to the earth. And these sorts of things. Just remember, you're associating it with a certain spirit as pictured by the divine chariot that Ezekiel described. Here's just, again, some more commentary that helps you understand how the clouds work, those 7 clouds. We won't go into that, but again, just a summary. And this is great to have in a notebook somewhere, because the 4 winds show up all the way from Genesis to Revelation. If you like prophecy, this should be in your toolkit. In fact, it wouldn't hurt to have a chart, again, with the tribal orientation, with their degalim individually, with the 4 divisions, their degalim, the 4 winds, what they bring when it's a blessing and what they bring when it's a curse, when there's chaos and division. So in summary, just remember, east brings the hot, damaging winds. The west brings the darkness. The north is going to bring hail, snow, damaging winds, more than you want. And then the south is going to bring the dews and the showers. When these things come in the right place, in the right season, at the right time, they can be blessings. When they come at the wrong time, they are curses. And they are a direct reflection of what Israel is doing. We have to take responsibility for the weather. You can't blame it on the weatherman anymore. He didn't do it. Israel did it. And this passage right here, again, this is another excerpt, but it explains how the machine is set up. It's a little more detailed than this because it's a story told by the 12 loaves, the bread of faces. You know, it's called showbread, but it's literally bread of faces. And the arrangement of that bread is part of this picture, actually. Because just like these 12 tribes are facing the 4 winds, you have the bread of faces that's adding a deeper, and it's not even mystical, it's just a deeper element to it. But the point of describing the machine is rains of blessing will fall from heaven. And we learned this probably in 8th grade science class. The rain falls down. The earth captures the moisture. Israel captures this moisture. If they are obedient, then they release the moisture right back up into the cloud. Basically, they reseed the cloud, and the rains fall again. They're obedient, they reseed the cloud, the rains fall again. If the rains fall and they're disobedient, that moisture is you're not going to have this harmonious cycle. It's going to become much more random than it was designed. Okay, so I want to add one thing, and somebody says, where's this in the Bible? Well, it is and it isn't. What you don't have is perhaps the 4 angels. What we do know is that Revelation does describe 4 angels, it just doesn't give their names. But by John's day, there's already a Jewish tradition of these 4 angels being tasked with controlling the 4 winds. So if we look at the Degel of Judah, which is the lion associated with the east wind, that angel was thought to be Gabriel. And there might be some dispute in these sources, but I think it's important for you to know that there's an angel associated with them so that Revelation makes more sense to you. Reuven, which is a man facing south, that is thought to be the angel Michael. And again, it's important because we talk about the archangels blowing the trumpet to gather from the 4 winds into the cloud of witnesses. It helps if you kind of have an idea, like these angels had faces, I guess. I don't know faces, but they had names. Ephraim in the west with the bull Degel. That's Rephael. Rephael. And then in the north, Dan, which is the eagle, is thought to be Uriel. And you will not find the name Uriel in scripture other than as a human being. This is coming out of, I think, Enoch, the book of Enoch. It's in the Apocalypse of Peter. And there's one other one. Which one?
I think it might be Jubilees.
Might be Jubilees. Okay. These are going to be extra biblical sources that will actually name Uriel, which means my light is El. And that's needed on the north side because there's also a hiddenness associated with the north side, not just the west side. And here's the verse we've been talking about from Revelation. And so I put in bold print some things I would want you to know. It says, after this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth so that no wind would blow on the earth or on the sea, or on any tree. Okay, the nations are associated with the seas. So don't let them blow on any nations. Hold back those 4 winds, angels. I have something I need to do. He says, and I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun. That would be the east. And the light comes from the east, but also the hot, most damaging winds will come from the east. We're talking like plague level winds. Having the seal of the living God, and he cried out with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea. See the equivalency he's building there between earth and sea? The nations are the seas. The nations are among, the places of the earth. Saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees. Trees are people. He's talking here about individuals. Trees do symbolize people. And they can symbolize good people or bad people. It depends on the tree. So he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted, notice this, to harm. To harm. This is damage. These are going to be the worst of these damaging winds. Sometimes we think they're bad and we don't have any idea what bad is yet. Because so far, there has been a preservative influence of Israel. Even though scattered, even though not as strong as they could be together, they have still been able, wherever they have been sown in the exile, to hold back the worst of what could happen in that area. I know you guys have been torn up by hurricanes over and over and over. I want you to just imagine what this coast would look like if you weren't here. It would be in a different spot. It's true. So he says, they can harm the earth and the sea, which is going to be the nations. What's about to happen when these 4 angels turn loose of the 4 winds, it's going to be because these tribes are sealed and they're just kind of going to be concealed within this encampment of the clouds of glory. And at this point, it's going to be like they're being stopped too. Same way he's holding, he's like, you guys stop. Yeshua said there's going to be a time to work, and then there's going to be a time when you can't work. And he's going to shut our mouths for a while, where intercession will not work. Now's the time to intercede, folks. Now's the time to be on your knees, because when this happens, you won't even be able to intercede. He's going to stop everything. He says, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And like I said, that's a representative number. If you keep reading, they're called the first fruits. So they represent lots and lots of people out in those fields.
Listen,
Go.
yeah, I don't know if you've ever looked this up before. This is just a question. We're going to have Q&A at the end. We can wait till then. But I wanted to mention something here, and that is
we looked up the four corners of the earth one time in reference to this, and they've seen from satellites in space that there are four areas on the earth where the oceans are actually piled into mountains, and it's winds that hold them there. And if those winds were to stop, the oceans would then level out, and they're not sure why the winds, at least they call them the four corners, why they would do this. I was just curious if you've ever heard this before.
I'd never heard that. That's interesting, though.
Yeah.
Because maybe somebody even said it earlier, but this is the lesson of these two Torah portions. What you do does affect the weather around the world. More specifically where you're planted, but Israel itself was designed, like I say, the four corners of the altar were pointing out in the direction of the winds. And so what you're doing, it's not just defensive, should an enemy come upon you, it's also in terms of trying to, okay, let me absorb this rain of blessing, and then let me release it so it can be released where it needs to go in the earth, so that the earth can enjoy these blessings falling down. Otherwise, we'll go into things like a drought. And even though it feels like it's only natural, he's showing us here over and over what is happening in the natural realm is just reflecting what's happening in the spiritual realm. If there's a famine, it's a famine for the word. If there's a lack of rain, it's a lack of the ability to receive the word, because it says it should fall like dew on thirsty grass. It should be drunk up. And if people aren't drinking up the Torah, it's a problem. It's affecting what the clouds can even do. They're not even able to.
Is this in connection with the sixth seal where you were talking about things being removed, possibly? The protection of Israel, what they're influencing right now? You described it as like the Father taking his gloves off. Is these two connected?
Yeah, it could be. Because if the four winds represent the four spirits, they affect everything. Because the four spirits, or the divine chariot, as it's called in Ezekiel, they execute the will of the Father like lightning, literally like lightning. Because they're described as having chashmal. In Hebrew, the modern Hebrew word for an electrician is chashmalai. Chashmal is electricity. It's not ish, it's not fire. It's way faster than fire. They execute the will of the Father that fast. How should Israel execute the will of the Father? Like lightning. We should all be chashmalayim, electricians. With nice big gloves. My dad was an electrician. He wired a lot of these sonic drive-ins in the South. When I was little, he would always send me up on the roof to catch the snake. And I thought I was having fun. He was just getting out of having to climb the ladder. You do that with kids, right? Make them think it's fun. No, saving steps. So every tribe was placed in a direction, specifically organized. And so what we know didn't typically happen, and still doesn't typically happen, you don't have a harmony of the winds. You will have a prevailing wind, but you don't have that full harmony where each of these four winds is able to simultaneously impart blessing. So when we function in our spiritual calling, if you don't know what you're called to do, don't move till you do. Get on your knees, get out in the field, meditate, pray, read, seek good counsel. Somebody will tell you what your gift is, and they will tell you what it isn't. Hopefully, they will tell you what it isn't. So that you're not on that wrong side of the camp doing something that they don't need. Or worse yet, is impairing what they are called to do. You seek out that place where your spiritual calling is. And once you find it, it won't feel like you're struggling against the wind anymore. That's how you'll know. It'll just fall into place. He will bear you on eagle's wings when it comes to that. And so whatever suffering you have to go through for the sake of that calling, you will gladly do it. And you can't imagine yourself living any other life, even if this one is hard. Even if it's hard, you still know you're being born of the Spirit. Because see, if that wasn't your calling, you'd give up. You wouldn't suffer, you would not endure those tests because it wasn't yours to begin with. So these 4 angels are said to be responsible for the 4 kingdoms. Now remember, the serpent is Pharaoh. He is going to be the father of these 4 kingdoms. He spawns these 4 kingdoms. We've been working on this in Bible study over the past year or so. So, and there's history there between Pharaoh and Babylon. But the 4 beast kingdoms, the serpent gives rise to the 4 beast kingdoms. So beginning with Babylon, the golden head, then you have Persia, Media, you've got the silver upper chest area. You've got Greece there. And then at the end, down there where the iron legs are, you see how it kind of mixtures into clay and iron. And so that tells you that the kingdom, the beast kingdom of Rome is still here. It's just mingled with other things. But they don't ever marry, by the way. So if you think of the Roman Empire in the 1st century, you have 2 major empires that descended from that Roman Empire. And they are mixed together on this earth, but they do not mingle. They do not intermarry. And they're both very strong. One of them right now appears to be stronger than the other. But in this progression, the golden head of Babylon, it simply passed things on to Persia, Media. Persia, Media just passed things on to Alexander. Alexander just passed things on to Rome. It's really seamless. It really is one body of the beast, even though it's 4 beasts and 4 kingdoms. And of course, we're dealing right now with the daughters of Rome. And what we learned in class was the rise of Rome actually began during the time of King Solomon, that far earlier, because what happened in the time of King Solomon had begun to crack the northern tribes and Judah. And when that fissure, when that crack occurred in Israel, there was a reed, it says, planted in Rome. And it had to grow. It says it grew out of a swamp. But that reed had to grow, and eventually it emerged. We see it by the 1st century in full function. And it's still in full function. It's just kind of morphed under different names. But the point that was made there is it Rome's fault, or Greece's fault, or Babylon's fault that they arose as kingdoms? No, it's Israel's fault. When the beast kingdoms arise, it's because Israel is in decline. When Israel begins to arise, that's when you know the beast goes into decline. So I don't care what you see out there today. It might seem more overwhelming than ever, but trust me, Israel is arising and the beast has become declining. Don't believe anything else. When was the last generation that this happened? People who did not grow up in a Torah covenant all of a sudden started saying, what must we do? 2,000 years, we're rising. That tells you the beast has been on his way down. And yes, he's squirming and scratching and clawing. He's using every resource at hand. It does not matter. He's going down. And that's why we have to be so careful about divisions among one another. A division like that gives him not only does it throw the wind into chaos, it gives him a place for accusation. So yes, when we decline, he arises. Same in your personal life. When your spiritual life begins to decline, then trust me, you have just fueled the beast that's about to rise. You say, why is this happening to me? Sometimes it's a test. Sometimes it's because you're in decline. And you need a big tent revival.
Lisa, what were the two parts of Rome you were alluding to about 2 minutes ago?
Amen.
Will they throw me off YouTube if I say it?
Yeah, you said 2 parts of Rome. One was more powerful than the other at present. What 2 parts were you referring to?
There's 2 major religions that came out of that period.
And they are.
I'm on YouTube. I'm live streaming. You know who they are. Who are the 2 most powerful religions on earth right now? Right. Right. One came out of the Holy Roman Empire, out of Rome, and the other religion actually learned from both Jews and from this other religion.
I thought that's what you meant.
Yeah. So that's why they can't marry, but they're still mingled together. But it tells you it's on its last legs, right? So Rome, even though we think of Edom as coming from the south, coming from Bozrah, that's true. But going back to our studies where we saw, okay, at some point, Edom went to Rome. He was part of that rising of Rome, and he fuels that rising of Rome. He's called the Red One. Edom is the Red One. And by the 1st century, this Red One is understood to be Rome. The problem is Rome is in the north. So is Edom from the south or from the north? Yes. But his strength here is in the north. And so when he blows in from the north where that reed was planted during the time of King Solomon, you see, again, what affected that. And you've seen how he spun off these daughter empires over the nations. If you've studied Western civilization, then you understand the rise of Rome and how it affected even when there was a conversion to Christianity, how it continued to affect the entire world. Okay, now right here, I don't want to read the whole thing here in Zechariah, or maybe I do. Depends on how close I can get. My right eye sees far away, that one sees close. Time up. This is from Zechariah. It says in chapter 1, verse 14 through 21, it says, to the angel, and the angel speaking with me said to me, proclaim, saying, this is what the Lord of armies says. Now remember, last week in Bamidbar, there was a census of the army. And then we saw the army sealed in Revelation. It says, I'm exceedingly jealous for Jerusalem and Sion, but I am very angry with the nations who were carefree. For while I was only a little angry, they furthered the disaster. Therefore the Lord says, I will return to Jerusalem with compassion. My house will be built in it, declares the Lord of armies, and the measuring line will be stretched over Jerusalem. That's why I say the winds, the 4 winds are from the perspective of Jerusalem. We don't expect Canadian winds or Fijian winds to blow the measuring line is Jerusalem. Again proclaim, saying, this is what the Lord of armies says, my cities will again overflow with prosperity, and the Lord will again comfort Sion and again choose Jerusalem. Then I raised my eyes and looked, and behold, there were 4 horns. Okay, how many of you have read about the horns in Revelation and thought, 10 horns, little horn, pulling the horn up by its roots? Oh, okay. No problem. Don't you hate getting old? It means you're still alive, though. So it says, these are the horns that have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. Now we know it was the four winds that carried them away. Now we have an overlay to what we know about the four winds. He says it's the four horns. So these four horns are associated with the four winds. It's another thing for your prophecy notebook. When I'm looking at horns, I might be looking at specific winds. And then the Lord showed me four craftsmen, and I said, what are these coming to do? And he said, these are the horns that have scattered Judah, so that no one lifts up his head. But these craftsmen have come to frighten them, to throw down the horns of the nations, and so forth. Does that make sense, though? That the horns can also represent, this is why I say you've got the four horns of the altar. Again, why did Israel need to bring sacrifices just for themselves? The nations, so that it would calm the seas, so that it would calm the winds that blew over the nations. And then the JPS Tanakh actually has a footnote in there. It says, I looked up and saw four horns. This represents the four horns corresponding to the four winds. It just spells it out for us. Okay, so knowing now what we know about horns, knowing about the four winds, understanding the Israelite weather machine, and why there are no many mitzvot, Isaiah 43:6 says, I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold back. Bring my sons from afar, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Matthew 24:31. Wasn't this great how we did the progression? We called in the nations, and then we added Jerusalem, because you call the nations in, and then Jerusalem elevates them up to the garden level. It says, he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet blast, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Just repeating what we know. Now here's the funny, and I know it's late, and if you need to go, you won't offend me or hurt my feelings if you need to leave. I don't know how my timing's going here. But this is a commentary from Rabbi Elazar. And sometimes you read things in the rabbinic sources and you think, that shouldn't make sense to them, but it makes perfect sense to people like us. It's people who know Yeshua and how we see him as King Messiah, that this passage would make any sense whatsoever. He said there's four winds in the world, the east wind, the west wind, the south wind, the north wind. The east wind, from there the light goes out to the world. The south wind, from there dew of blessing and rains of blessing go out to the world. The west wind, from there darkness goes out to the world. The north wind, from there stores of snow and stores of hail and cold and heat and rains go out to the world. And then in another opinion, he says the north wind, this is about the north wind. He created, but didn't complete it. He said that anyone who would say that he is God should come and complete this wind, which I left alone, and all will know that he is God. Is that not the strangest statement you would ever want to hear coming out of rabbinic literature? So we've got these four winds, each doing a different job. And even the north and the south, where he says, I'll say to the north, give them up. To the south, don't hold back. Well, those are different waters. You can see right here. The two kinds of water are completely different. It's like the second day of creation. You had to separate the waters from the waters because there was chaos. But then he throws in this little comment. If you can control the north wind, say you're God. Now, the Sea of Galilee is also in a place called Galilee of the Nations. Kind of goes back to the prophecies of like Naphtali and, the nations will see a great light. And so I dropped a pin here on a hotel where Keisha Gallagher and I had taken a tour group a couple years ago. It's on the west side of the lake of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee. And while we were staying at that hotel, we had no more, and by the way, I've been very sarcastic about the disciples getting scared of a little storm. Once I saw the size of the Sea of Galilee, I saw it's this little lake. If you put 2 ships in that lake, it would be like toys floating in a bathtub. That's how small it is. And I thought, okay, a little storm, and they're fishermen, they work all night. And a little storm blows up, and they're like, oh, we're all gonna die. Yeshua, wake up, don't you care, we're gonna die. Oh, and I'm like, okay, drama kings, settle down. It's a little lake and a little storm. There's no ships. Why did King James put ships in there? I don't know. Made good storytelling. No ship is gonna float in the Lake of Galilee. And so that sarcasm needed to be dealt with. Right? So we check into the hotel. The tour group's going to go down to the boat and ride the boat out onto the boat out to the Galilee. And I cannot stand riding that boat. There's this guy that sings on the boat, and everybody thinks he's wonderful. But if you know anything about me, I don't do musicals. I don't care if it's the Sound of Music, the Fiddler on the Roof. Please commit. If you're going to tell me a story, tell me a story. If you're going to sing to me, sing to me. I mean, in the middle of Pastor Mark's teaching, nobody broke out in song. We don't do that. Well, some people do, but they watch musicals. So I don't do the boat. And I always find creative ways to get out of riding the boat, because I can't listen to this guy. And he's wonderful, by the way. Get the DVD or whatever. And so Keisha had me up on the top floor, and I had this big balcony. And so I went up, and I went out on the balcony to see if I could see our tour group going out to the boat. And all of a sudden, you talk about a rushing mighty wind, blew through the place. I thought, this sounds like a tornado. When we lived in Oklahoma, I knew what tornadoes sounded like. Same thing, you know, if you've ever heard those winds, you know exactly what they sound like. We lived down in St. Mary Parish, Louisiana for a while. When those hurricanes come in, you know what they sound like. And I'm up on the top floor, and I hear this rushing mighty wind, and everything's shaking. And I'm looking down at the lake, which is due east. Nothing going on down there. And I look back, and in the mountains behind me, coming from the west, was the biggest dust storm I had ever seen in my life. No rain. There was no rain in it. It was just this tremendous dust storm. And at some point, I've got my phone and I videoed it, several minutes of it, because I'm like, this is like a hurricane. These palm trees are bending over, stuff's blowing up in the air. All these boats are trying to get back to the dock. Like, I have never seen anything like this just blow up with a dust storm. And finally, I had to go inside. I pulled the windows shut and locked them, and the curtains were still blown out straight. That was strong. I thought, I didn't know they had tornadoes in Israel, but that's exactly what it felt like. And then it stopped. It was probably 30, 40 minutes max, and hardly any rain at all. In fact, if there was, it was just a few drops. I thought, what's going on here? Why did this little tour group at Sukkot of the nations need to come to Galilee of the nations to see a dust storm coming in from the west? Keep that in mind. This is Mark 4:35. On the same day, when evening had come, that sounded familiar, he said to them, let us cross to the other side. Now, when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was. And other little boats were also with him, and a great windstorm arose. And the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said, Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing? And he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, the wind and the sea, the nations, Galilee of the nations. He said to the nations, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. Wouldn't you love to have a core sample of that moment around the world?
Yes.
But he said to them, why are you so fearful? I want to say that to people nowadays. Why are you so fearful? If you're the light in the world, why are you absorbing the darkness? I mean, you absorb more garbage on Facebook than any little nugget of light you might be throwing out there. You know what the rabbis say? In all waste, there's still a little bit of food. Now, Facebook is kind of like that. You're going to have to dig through to find a little bit of food. We're not like that. We're Israel. We go for the kosher meals. Quit wading through Facebook hoping for a word. Or what do you call those things? The meme, the nice inspirational picture. It'll last for about 30 seconds and you'll forget it. This stuff right here, you don't forget it. When the wind comes, you don't forget it. When the seas start coming, you don't forget it. You can have faith that he is in control of the nations. He says, why are you fearful? How is it that you have no faith? I mean, this is exactly when you should be having faith. You don't get faith exercises when things are going great. And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, who can this be, that even the wind and the nations obey him? Who can this be? Remember what that rabbi said? I'm leaving the north wind incomplete. It's in a state of chaos. Let him who says he is God come and complete this wind. Take control and authority over this wind, and you will know that he is God. And the disciples are like, oh my goodness. They're obeying him. And we're assuming all 12 are in the boat. You see the message he's sending to those 12 disciples in those encampments? They represent those encampments. Okay, dudes, you're going to have to get out there. They've been scattered to the four winds. You got to go teach them the Torah. Yeshua didn't just say, go get them saved. He said, go teach them everything that I've commanded you. Now you have the tools to come back home. He's saying, calm, peace, be still. Don't be tossed about by the waves. You have a purpose. Now get your ears tuned and know what a lion sounds like. And so why did it have to specifically say that Yeshua was sleeping on a pillow? In a nutshell, it goes all the way back to Genesis 28, 10 through 16, when Jacob was running to the north. He's going to Aram. He's going north, and he stops, and he puts together stones for a pillow. And when he wakes up, he says, oh my goodness, this is the house of God, and I didn't know it. He saw angels ascending and descending. Wonder what those angels were doing. And so the house of God right here. Well, when you realize the promise that follows it, he used the pillow for a support for his head. And then as he wakes up, we know that he anoints the stone with oil. The Mashiach is from Mashach, the anointed one. And we know that he is the stone. Jacob pours oil, he anoints the stone in that place. The promise he received was your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth. Remember that dust storm coming in on us from the west? You will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. How can he make our weather better where we are? No many mitzvot. We keep the mitzvot. We move at the direction of the Holy Spirit. We have our ears tuned to our specific ruach, our calling. We function in our calling as a group. There were 12 tribes, but there was one Mishkan. They knew how to gather together and to harmonize. In fact, you had to get 6 wagons, 2 tribes had to go in together. You realize that they were individuals, but they could only function with one other person, just like the half shekel. 1 wagon, 2 tribes. And this is a portion. But he says, I'll keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, the Lord is certainly in this place, and I did not know it. He is with you, whether you're aware of it or not. And so when we go back and look at where he had used the stone as a support for his head, that key word there is rosh, for head, for the pillow. When we go into the Greek that describes the pillow that Yeshua used, guess what the word was? Rosh, for his head. And Jacob anoints the head of the Messiah. That's what's happening there. Messiah can bring us back. Let's see, we'll skip a little bit here. Skip that. And basically all that is saying, again, is how the divinely programmed machine operates. Disobedience causes heaven to close off the clouds of blessing. Obedience releases them. Disobedience will render the 4 winds into chaos. Obedience will bring peace even among those 4 winds, even though they do 4 separate things. Just like those 4 encampments. They had 4 separate spirits that they represented, and yet they all moved as one, like a wheel within a wheel. You've got the inner camp of the Levites, you've got the outer camp of the tribes. And lest we think this applies only to the land of Israel itself, only, and it doesn't matter what we do wherever we are, I would remind you of Noah's flood. The whole earth. It may be in a weakened, as it radiates outward, the effects and the power of it may be weaker, but there's a much higher standard in the land, yes, it will spit you out. I mean, just, you're out. You can get away with a lot more out here than you can there. That's why we're doing gardening practice in the wilderness. He's humbling us here to see what's in our heart. Because if he puts us in Jerusalem at that level of elevation and we don't know gardening techniques 101, we right back out. In fact, I said the clouds of glory, you didn't even have to wait for somebody to come escort you out of the camp. The cloud would just, there you went. You're outside the camp now. You have to follow around on the perimeter, outer darkness. Wouldn't that be great? We didn't have to figure out what people's agendas were. The cloud would just spit them out the butt. Wow. Wouldn't have seen that one coming, but, or yeah, I saw that one coming. So we've got Jacob going north. He's going to spread his seed out there. This is also the basis for the sheaf, the wave offering, especially at the giving of the barley harvest, and it's connected textually to Shavuot, by the way. And so when they would wave those sheaves in the directions, it goes back to the 4 winds, which goes back to 4 is 7 and 7 is 4, if that makes sense. If you've done creation gospel, that makes perfect sense to you. And that's why I brought my menorah. Watch me. Okay, 7, 4. because this middle pillar, remember, was the original piece of beaten gold. So these things right here are just beaten out of the original piece, right? So it's really one, but it's 7. 7 is the completion, but the 4 is the wholeness. So now we see, if we see things broken down into 4 seals, 4 living spirits, but yet we know that there's 7, you understand that once you fold it, then these 2 right here touch. They become very similar. So let's say that this wind right here was the west wind. Let's say this is represented by Ephraim. And we know that the west wind represented darkness. Well, in the beginning, on day 1, there was darkness. And he said, let there be. And on Shabbat, we have light. You see how that's going to work? What about the easy one here, the middle one? What was the birth order of Judah? 4. Now, if I stretch it out, count from either side. What's the middle? 4. So 4 is 7, and 7 is 4, and 1. So we've got Judah right here, the Lion of Judah. Now do you see how Yeshua is the one in the middle of the lampstand? And in Revelation, he is called the Lion of Judah, because the Lion of Judah has to roar in order to draw these winds into harmony. Same thing. We'll skip these guys right here for now. Let's look at the 3rd and the 5th. Let's just say that this is the south side, Reuven, the man. Dew and showers, which represent resurrection. Okay, that south wind, if we opened it up, we're going to have day 3, the days that the plant and the first fruits appeared on the earth. And we're going to have Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, which is Resurrection Day. Is it starting to get clearer how the 4 angels work with the 4 winds, but also with the 7 spirits? They're 4 spirits, but they're 7 spirits. And you guys seen me do this before, different menorah, how if you drew it on out, they would be going in circles. And now you see the wheel within the wheel, more graphically. So this camp is getting more and more important. And again, the sheaf offering, it says the movements forward and backward were to counteract the effects of injurious winds, the movements upwards and downwards to counteract the effect of injurious dews.
Injurious what?
Dews, like mountain dew. Well, do the do. Do-da, do-da. So why does the divine chariot have the image of a man, and therefore the Degel of Reuven had the symbol of a man? That's kind of the one that, like, which one of these creatures doesn't belong on the 4 banners? Why the man? Because everything else is like lion, ox, eagle. Well, it's taken out of a Targum, which is an Aramaic translation from the Hebrew to help the non-Hebrew speaker of the 1st, 2nd century understand the Hebrew text. So it'd be like translating it into language you can understand. It says, and this is to Genesis 2, by the way. The Lord God created man in 2 formations and took dust from the place of the house of the sanctuary. That's why you want to go to Jerusalem so bad, or you should. Anybody in here not want to go to Jerusalem? Okay, so we agree that our hearts are drawn to Jerusalem. It's not just because it's a spiritual concept. It's because the very skin, muscle, organs, the physical part of your body was formed from the Temple Mount. That's your home. That's even your flesh wants to go home when it's listening to the Spirit. Your spirit will say, "Where's home?" And your flesh will say, "I remember when I was formed. I was formed from the dust." Then there's dispute as to whether the outer altar was the dust under there. It has to do with certain debates about the ashes and so forth. And others say it was underneath where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. And it was called the Well of Souls. And that's still there to this day. If you could get inside the structure that's up there, there is a cavity in the ground that is still recognized as the Well of Souls. So as the souls were brought up, they were formed from the dust. But it also says, and this was a new one on me, it says also from the four winds of the world. So not only were you formed from the dust of the Temple Mount, the four winds of the world are also part of who you are. And we know that they do. They represent spirit. It says they were mixed from all the waters of the world and created red, black, and white, and breathed into his nostrils the inspiration of life. And there was in the body of Adam the inspiration of a speaking spirit, unto the illumination of the eyes and the hearing of the ears. So from the beginning, we were formed perfectly to be able to respond to the Ruach and to move in any direction that the Spirit told us to go. And not only that, to do it in harmony with one another. Not just on our own, let me follow the Spirit. It's you have a sense of who's around you and you are able to move as a tribe. Disobedience causes misdirection. Disobedience causes misdirection. Disobedience causes misdirection. Disobedience causes misdirection. Disobedience causes
Misdirection.
That's the lesson. And so that takes us to Ezekiel 37:9. And by the way, when Ezekiel does this, when he has this vision of the valley of dry bones, there's two things coming from rabbinic literature that you may not be aware of. Number one, they believe that specifically Ephraim's bones were thought to be in this valley because they said Ephraim left Egypt a certain number of Ephraim left Egypt about 30 years too soon. And it says that the Philistines or the Canaanites just slaughtered them. And they left their bones unburied. And that's why 30 years later, the Israelites were taken by a different route. He says, I don't want them to see those bones and be discouraged because they'll think there's war and think they'll be left for dead. So he took them by a different route. These bones are thought to have represented Ephraim in this valley. It's also thought that at the exact moment that the breath came into these bones, that King Nebuchadnezzar's golden image fell. And that was the image of the beast, by the way. That was the beginning image of the beast. Remember the golden head? He said, okay, Daniel, you interpreted my dream, but here's the way I'll get around that. I'll make the whole image gold. It'll all be my kingdom. So that was the original image of the beast. And they say when this blew through that valley, that big statue fell over. We don't know, but it's a great story. He says, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, son of man, and say to the breath, the Lord God says this, come from the four winds, breath, and breathe on these slain so that they come to life. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath entered them, and they came to life and stood on their feet, an exceedingly great army. You were numbered last week, by the way. Do you know you were? In Bamidbar, you were numbered as an army. And he says, breathe on this slain army. Come to life and get up on your feet. And that's exactly what we have here. We have a resurrecting army of priests. Whether you're a Levitical priest, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I do know that you're a priest to the nations. I do know that you are priests who have been assigned a place. You've been carried by the wind to wherever you are, but you are no longer at the mercy of the wind. If Yeshua could command the winds and the sea to obey the will of the Father and bring peace to the earth, then you can bring peace wherever you are. And you practice that gardening 101. And when you hear that lion roar, you're going to know which direction to go. You're going to go east. You're going to follow Judah. That's why you pray toward the east, right? You do the Shema toward the east, toward the Temple Mount, because what was happening in that temple was on behalf of all the nations. The four corners of that altar were for all nations. And so we'll end with this. Song of Songs 4:16 says, awake, north wind. Who's in the north? Hidden in Edom. Isn't that funny? They said he was hidden in Edom. Pretty accurate, wouldn't you think? Awake, north wind, and come, wind of the south, make my garden breathe. Breathe out fragrance, and may its balsam oils flow. May my beloved come into his garden and eat its delicious fruits. See, when you start blowing home, you're going to start smelling the garden, because remember, you guys called in the exiles. Well, when they start coming in, your next step was restore Jerusalem. Jerusalem is that level above that Jacob was saying. And you should start, you smell that. It's obedience. It's willingness. It's humility. These are fruits in the garden. And he says, okay, you heard me when I called you in. Now I'm going to lift you up. And every now and then, if you're paying attention, you'll smell it. You'll smell it. You'll feel as though maybe at times time is different. It's not normal. Place is different. It's not normal. He's showing you those little wrinkles in time and space like he did Jacob. He's showing you those angels ascending and descending. And he's showing you that where you were going, you might be going to the farthest place in the north, but that's exactly where Messiah is hidden. And when he arouses, they said, from his dormancy, he's going to start calling them in. Okay, I got the live stream.